Yes. Thank you very much. Thanks for the warm applauses. It encourages us to continue. The person we are having as we're going to have 4 keynote speakers in the course of this conference. The first one is Mamadou Biyete, and then we'll have tomorrow Jerry Salole, who is giving a keynote. On Friday, we'll have Natalia Kanem, who will give a keynote. But already tomorrow evening, we also have, during the award ceremony, a keynote that will be delivered by Akwesi Edu, who is here with us also. And then we have Ignite Talks as well, which we'll be speaking to when the time comes. Mamadou is our first keynote speaker. He's somebody I have a great pleasure introducing. He's a friend, he's a brother, he's somebody I have known for many, 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 many years, and somebody for whom I have great admiration. He's currently the Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation, which has its headquarters in Harare, Zimbabwe. A moment to salute all the colleagues who traveled from Zim who are here, Briggs and the team. Mamadou, the AU, the African Capacity Building Foundation, is an African Union specialized agency for capacity development, working in 48 countries across the 8 regional economic communities of the continent. And so he's been in this position since 2022. He joined the ACBF and really took along many, many years of experience, decades of experience actually, more than 30 years of field experience in capacity building and in leadership positions across the continent and in different parts of the world. He has experience in both the private and the public sector, as well as with leading international development agencies. And that experience is very key, and it inspires everything and informs everything that he does, including the speech that he'll be sharing with us here today. We were privileged to have a view of the speech he shared us ahead of, of the day today. Mamadou is an agricultural economist by training. He has a wealth of experience in the development sector in Africa. His experience includes strategic leadership, program development, and the implementation of strategy development and implementation, public policy analysis, advocacy and campaigning, and community participatory development. He joined ACBF from Visa, where he had served as Visa. This is in everybody's pockets these days, or everybody's wallet. It's a global institution, one of the leading, systems today. So Mamadou was served as vice president and global head of inclusive growth at Visa, and before that he was the regional head of social impact for Central and Eastern Europe, Middle East, and the Africa region at Visa. And in those roles, he worked with non-profit clients and government organizations to bring the Visa social impact vision to life in markets around the world. And at Visa, he collaboratively developed a global digital financial education strategy and forged strategic multi-stakeholder partnerships. And before joining Visa, he was with the Rockefeller Foundation as the managing director of the Africa Regional Office in Nairobi, overseeing the Rockefeller Foundation's work across the continent. And now this included work on youth employment, health, philanthropy, agriculture, and food security, and advancing African inclusive economies. I mean, remember a great conference he organized that we were very privileged to participate in while I was at Kudesria in Nairobi on advancing African inclusive economies, or inclusive economies in Africa. Mamadou at Rockefeller did, again, a great job, and one of the really things that people remember him for, and will continue to remember him for forever, is a program they call Digital Jobs Africa, an initiative under which over 160,000 youth received demand-driven employability training and global impact sourcing and the global impact sourcing coalition. And that was formed out of that particular initiative. So he has a lot of really, his CV is so impressive and so rich. If you want to go through it, we'll spend a lot of time here. But just to mention that he has also been the director of Oxfam. Moment to salute Khar Jai, who is here leading the Oxfam office in Senegal. But Mamadou was head of Oxfam before joining the Rockefeller Foundation. And at Oxfam, one of the things he did, and he's still remembered for also, is a program that they co-designed called Saving for Change, an innovative microfinance program that is today improving the lives of over 700,000 women in Mali and Senegal. So Mamadou is really somebody who, he holds a master's degree in agricultural economics from Ohio State University, and he has a lot of recognitions and awards from different parts of the world, which are, the list is just too long to go through here. And it's just, important to know who is speaking to us. Mamadou, we are really very proud to have you with us. Thank you for taking the time. You were in Senegal just less than 10 days ago, and traveling across the continent is not easy. And you came, went back, and then insisted on coming back again to be with us here today. And we really appreciate you. We know he's serving on the boards of many organizations, including CAPSI. Becky here knows, we know, and we're together on that board, so I know what you contributed to that as well. Mamadou, vous avez la parole. Merci beaucoup encore une fois.
Mamadou, you have the floor. It is important that a son of this country, a son of this region, sets the tone as the presenter of the keynote address to this ceremony.
Thank you very much, Ebrima, for a very, very generous introduction. I wonder even if my contribution will be as long as the introduction, just to say how generous it was. Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, distinguished guests, I'm very pleased to and honored and humbled to stand here before you with the opportunity to address you and very humbly share some of our reflections on African philanthropy at an inflection point. What the challenges are, in what context, and what can we do to take advantage of this situation. But before I go on, you will allow me to express my joy this morning to come back here in Saly after many, many years. Although I am Senegalese, but I have been many years outside of Senegal, and when I have the opportunity to come back home, I don't often have the time to come here in this region. And why? Two things that you will allow me to say before that make my joy. First of all, coming back to Saly brings reminiscences of many years back in my career. 1997, I think it's more than 20 years now, I was posted here in Bour, which is just 2-3 kilometers from this place, as the regional head of the Crédit Agricole, the agricultural credit bank here, working and bringing finance to fisher people, but also supporting women with capital for processing of seafood and fish products and make a living. So it's really good to come back here and to see that now Saly and Bour are almost together as one city and see the change that has happened here. The second thing that makes me so happy today is to meet this morning at breakfast and just now here one of the co-facilitators or presenters of this conference, Mr. Khalil Gueye. Growing here in Senegal in the 80s, he was one of the, I would say, most popular TV hosts here in Senegal. I believe that his TV show was called Boulevard des Stars. And I just remember those days when you would have a few TV sets in a whole neighborhood. And on Saturday evenings, we would congregate in one house to watch Boulevard des Stars. He played a lot in our cultural education, introducing us to different musics coming from all over the world, America, Africa, etc. Thank you very much for contributing to our openness as a global citizen. Thank you. And of course, I'm very pleased to see big brothers here in philanthropy, friends, colleagues. With him, we have had the opportunity to work with, to learn from, and to bring a humble contribution to inclusive economies, to empowering our people in Africa. So, audience, I'm conflicted right now. I'm conflicted between two things. I'm conflicted between just going ahead and reading a speech that I've prepared, and actually the other thing is just going with the flow and reflecting on many things that we see in this space. And I think that I would rather go for the second option. The speech will be anyway available to you for you to read. When we talk about philanthropy at an inflection point, I think that my thought goes to three things. Probably there are more. But I want to think first at the many inflections that we see in the global arena over the past couple of years. The first one, whose impact continues to have effect on us, on our lives, on our economies, is COVID-19. One of the most deadly, I think that in terms of affecting and showcasing the global vulnerability of the world, regardless whether you were a rich country or a poor country, of how, as a global community, when we are not ready, when we are not building resilience, when we don't have strong systems and shared systems, how we are vulnerable as a global community, and the impact it has had on lives, on economies, on vulnerability. The global economy had shrunk, if I remember correctly, globally by 2.2% GDP. In Africa was, I believe, about 1.6%. And we continue to live that. The second one in the global arena, for me, very important that we cannot ignore, is the war in Europe. And what a wake-up call it has given us as Africans. And I think that even more recently, we have seen the withdrawal of Russia from the grain agreement, the big concern it has brought to the world, but more importantly in Africa. The wake-up call it gave us is also the threats on our own ability to feed ourselves. It has brought, I think, or reaffirm the new paradigm. We have talked mostly in the world about food security. But this change and big change in the world takes us to speak no more just about food security, but about food sovereignty. And it makes us reflect as a continent with 30 million square kilometers, 1.3 or 4 billion people, the most useful continent, how we can depend on the agricultural production of two countries that probably are not together, maybe the size of DRC or something. So that's a big, I think, change that we see. And also the situation of capital as well, as induced by that. And how capital has been mostly more channeled toward addressing the impacts of these issues in the countries where most global philanthropic money was coming from and coming into Africa, and raises the importance of us banking on our own selves even more. So I think those are really important points at the global level. In Africa, we can see the issues around democracy. We can agree that our continent for many years has been on a trajectory of increasing democracy. But what we are seeing in West Africa, largely due to economic crisis these days, actually calls for attention to us. I remember in the late 90s, when you looked at the map of West Africa, you would see that every head of state was either a military or a former military that came to power through unconstitutional change. And we have seen a lot of change over the past 15, 20 years, whereby we could see almost every country led by an elected head of state. But over the past 3 years, it looks like we are going backwards. And what does that mean in terms of democracy and where we focus our resources as countries to address the challenges or empower our people to address the challenges they face? I think it's a big change. We're seeing also the impact of that shrinking space for civil society, and also big population growth, faster than the economic growth, the vulnerability in which it has put our youth, the most useful continent. By 2050, only the youth segment between 18 and 24 will double to 400 million. What does that mean? And we've seen these days many young people dying in the Mediterranean and Atlantic, losing faith in the ability of our continent to secure a future for them, and today ready to perish. What does that mean, and what does that mean for African philanthropy? And I think, if I think that philanthropy is the grease that oils the wheel of progress in society, then I think that it is important for us to look at also what are the inflection points that we see in philanthropy, and in particular in African philanthropy, and which we need to address or take advantage of for philanthropy to hold that promise to support transformation of society. And some of them I will just list, not comprehensive, but I think very important. It's a very changing landscape. We see many family foundations joining the movement. We also see many high net worth individuals coming in, instituting foundations, with a lot of hype, by the way. We see also a growing number of what I could call the dot-com, but probably, I would probably say corporate foundations coming. Today we are seeing a change, a very interesting change in the space. What used to be called as RSE, Responsabilité Sociétale and Environmental, today is changing to become more corporate foundations, repackaged in that way, but not necessarily focusing on inclusive economies, but actually using philanthropy to actually buy a license to operate in societies. So I think this is also an important change that we need to see. So if we think again on the hypothesis that philanthropy has the power because, unlike governments, its decisions do not depend on the potential outcome of the next election, or unlike corporates, its decisions and investments is not based on the potential quarterly or half-yearly earnings and how that supports that, then we have a unique power, a unique opportunity to have the freedom to do what matters. But it is important also to understand that regardless of the resources available to us as philanthropic groups, what we have is never enough, and it's just as a drop in the ocean of needs. So the idea of leverage becomes even more important in the midst of all those changes that I've talked about. And I think that you have really given 4 themes to look at and to concentrate on and to reflect on as a group, which are people, power, practice, and policy, to have that impact that we are foreseeing. Let me share my thoughts about each of them. When I think about people in this context and in our community, I really think about skills, knowledge. To really foster innovation, and innovation not being just disruptive change, but taking proven solutions that have brought fruits, applying them into new problems, new places, new contexts. To do that, we need knowledge and we need skills. We need a knowledge society. And this means that we need to increase investment in people. And when I say people, it's not people out there. It's first and foremost people within the philanthropic sector. Because to have the fruits that we want, and I think this is very easy to understand. I always say to have a good plant, you need 2 things. You need a very good seed, and you need a fertile soil. Think about the good seed as the competent, the knowledgeable, and the skillful people, coming also with all the other soft skills such as leadership, accountability, readiness to serve, what that means for us. And I think that this is something that is extremely important that we today actually as a community think about. How do we invest in ourselves actually to really up the game and bring the kind of knowledge and skills in sectors, emerging sectors that we don't have in the community. I think it is extremely important, perhaps for some of these organizations here, to undertake an inquiry, a study, and to look at the challenges that we face today, the upcoming challenges in the rapidly digitizing world. Are we, as a philanthropic community, endowed and have within our organizations all the skills that we need to be able to face that challenge? And obviously it's not there, but I cannot talk about people without talking about institutions, because I talked about two things. Obviously, good seed, fertile soil. Fertile soil for me are institutions. And we should ask ourselves today, if we look back, to say, do we have today the right institutions? Those institutions that are ready and able to tackle the challenges of today and the challenges of tomorrow. I think that many of us will be tempted to say no. Then what does that mean? What those institutions should look like? What are the transformations, the ways of working? And this speaks to the problem of practice that needs to take place to be able to have those two conditions. And I always say those two conditions are not enough if we are not, as a philanthropic community also, not looking at that mindset change in terms of our role and our responsibility. And we know there are challenges around financing and other things, but our ingenuity and our change of perspective and mindset is going to make that difference. It's very interesting. Many of you would be surprised if I said, actually, crops don't need rain. But it's true. Crops don't need rain. Crops need water. It's all about perspective. We often see in Africa farmers sitting next to a water stream and complaining that it has not rained yet. And think about that in our own context. And that's the kind of change of perspective and change of mindset that I'm talking about. The second point is about power. In my perspective, I think that when we talk about power, it's really about the balance of giving and recipients. And how do we change that narrative that we are helping and supporting people transform their lives without making them dependable, too much dependent? And what does that mean into our upward and our downward accountability towards them? Not that just us thinking about what is nice, what are the good solutions to them, but how do we genuinely make them and bring them as part of the solution, and prioritizing that. And to me, that's about the power. And to me, the power also speaks to private sector. I said earlier, because of the imperatives of the next quarterly earnings limits the ability oftentimes of private sector in investing in untested solutions. We have seen it and seen it again. But here is an important role that actually philanthropy can play. Because we can fail, we can learn. But we can invest in those new untested ideas. And not doing it just because it's cool, but we believe that because when it works and there is a proven business case, there is a market for it. And there is someone who will be willing to invest in that solution and take it to scale. That's also about in the power of philanthropy. And again, this can only be done if we operate that change of mindset that I've been talking about. I want to talk briefly about practice. It feels to me, and obviously I think that CAPSI and perhaps many other organizations like CAPSI can also do some inquiry about that. Yes, it is a growing community of philanthropy in Africa. We have many platforms, some of them are here. But I believe that we are, and more evidence needs to be brought to that. But I think that we are together without truly always being together in addressing the key challenges that we face. Mutualizing our efforts, mutualizing our knowledge, mutualizing our influence, mutualizing our resources to tackle big problems. And this will require, actually, for many of us, to just move away or do less and put less attention on the issue of putting cool stories on our website, but really looking at how we can build a common narrative as a community and showcase how we can address and tackle a big problem. And I will give you an example that I have been an actor of. A few years back, I think now probably 7 years, as I was heading Rockefeller Foundation and investing importantly, significantly in agriculture, I realized that many of our colleagues actually, we were funding the same actors for the same goals, but we were measuring outcomes differently. Our work was not coordinated. At the end of the day, the organizations, African organizations we were funding and supporting, were very busy satisfying our individual organizational desiderata than actually focusing on the real problem of transformation of African agriculture. And this is many times the case in this space. What we did was call a few of them and say, let's sit down and look at this issue and see how we can coordinate our work. At the time, we brought in Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, ourselves, Rockefeller Foundation. We brought in USAID, and we sat down and said, actually, how do our objectives compare? And we realized that we were pursuing the same type of outcomes. And we said, can we agree to have a common results measurement framework? Can we agree to put our resources together and empower one organization, which was AGRA, with very solid goals in many countries with big numbers to reach? And that's what we did. Gates put in $200 million for 5 years. We, Rockefeller, put in $50 million. USAID put $90 million. And that started the program. We were coordinating and having only one meeting with all these stakeholders with AGRA. So there was less pressure more resources for AGRA to actually focus on the development outcomes. Along the line, many other joined. GIZ joined with 30 million euros. UK joined with another 50 million pounds, etc., etc. And this has given the biggest one philanthropic actually budget for agricultural transformation to a single program. Over $700 million just for 5 years. And I think it is possible. We need to come together to mutualize our resources for big problems. We all do great work here and there, transform the lives of 1 or 2 or 3 people, small communities. But the issues of scale of impact is a big problem. And that issue of scale of impact cannot be resolved if we do not come together on joint programs, joint goals, joint ways of measuring our impact, and also telling the story of not institutions, but telling the story of a group of institutions making change. And finally, that's to me about what we can look at in practice. The other thing is about really being ruthless about measuring and showcasing our impact. Today, we must admit it. The policy space or regulatory space is still not as incentivizing on our continent, although there are differences between from country to country. It's still not very favorable to the strengthening of philanthropy. Sometimes we even see the contrary. I'll come here again with a story, and I think that my brother Akwasi here will remember that. A few years back, I think we are talking here about 2010 or 2009, here in Senegal. The government decided actually to revoke the registration of all international development organizations. And each and every one had to go back and register individually. And we see many of such things happening in different places. And I remember we met at Oxfam, at our offices, brought everyone to have a discussion and say, okay, we have all received individual letters, but can we sit together and discuss about this issue and see how we can co-strategize to address this? And I remember there was somebody who said, okay, but we need to make this issue also public so that we can garner the support of our beneficiaries. And I remember, and I think this was Brother Akwasi in his wisdom, who said, do we have evidence that if we put this in the public, we will be supported by the public? What do we think about how the public is seeing us, beyond just the beneficiaries of our work in remote rural villages? How are we seen in town? Are we seen as the big guys in 4x4 cars, flying from a place to place, etc.? Would it be more positive support or negative support to us? And to me, I am telling this story because this tells about the issue of our accountability to everyone. Because of the nature of how we are funded as philanthropic organizations, we don't feel the pressure to account on what we do, and especially to the broad public. And I think that occurrence, that issue, showed, if it was needed more than ever, the importance not just to account to the people who fund you or the people that you work with directly, but also the importance of your accountability worldwide to society more globally. And I think this is something that is extremely important we need to look at and consider in our practice. And the last point I will talk about, because I'm conscious of time, is the issue of policy. Extremely important. Policy, and I say regulation. I want to add regulation, because I believe that the first step in policy implementation is regulation. And we think that we have an important role to play also in this space, because policy is best done when it is evidence-based. Evidence comes from where? Evidence comes from two places, perhaps at least, but probably many more. One is research. How are we as a community supporting the generation of knowledge through society? Working with academics, working with think tanks. Today, we at ACBF support the Africa Think Tank Network, a network of 60 think tanks. But today, the biggest challenge of these think tanks are their funding and their sustainability. What role can we play to support them to conduct the research and generate the knowledge, the evidence, and the insights that private sector actors need, that policymakers need, actually to devise the conducive policies? And I think this is very important, and to make it demand-driven as well. And I think we have a very important role that we can play with there. The second area is, to me, evidence comes from practice, from our work, from the programs that we develop, the programs that we implement, the programs that we evaluate. But not just evaluate whether we have done it or not done it, what are the numbers, but really looking at very deeply in terms of the outcomes and the impact and how this is changing the lives of people. And what are the lessons that we are learning from that, and how we disseminate those lessons and put them in the hands of those who make policy. I think there is an extremely important role that philanthropy can play in that. But it is also the issue of data. Last year, in partnership with data.org and the MacJ Foundation, we released a report on data talent in the social sector. What we realize is that there is a huge shortage of data scientists, data miners, actually in the social sector. When we say social sector, this means government, and this means philanthropic organizations, this means civil society organizations. And what does that suggest? That suggests that probably most of programs, development programs that are being developed, are not based on real and strong evidence. Because not only we don't have the data, but also we don't have the capacity to mine it and to make the data speak and provide that evidence. So I think that it is extremely important for us, and this links to my first point about people, is really how we can invest in building that capability, in increasing data talent for our sector, so that the decisions, investment decisions, are not based on our just goodwill or what we see cool and nice here and there, but we have the right evidence, the right data that guide that decision making. I cannot finish without telling a little bit about the African Capacity Building Foundation. and the role we can play in this. ACBF has been created 32 years ago in 1991 in the midst of structural adjustments in Africa. Because at the time there were 12 states that received massive funding from the World Bank, the African Development Bank, UNDP, and others to support these structural adjustment programs. But things were not moving. Countries were having challenges actually using the resources. The burn rate was very low, and at the end of programs, significant amount of those resources were being returned. And that's in that context that ACBF was created, understanding that it's not just about an issue of money, but it is also an issue of capacity. Capacity to plan, capacity to execute. Over time, ACBF has trained over 50,000 civil servants. Many of them today hold high offices in their government. Ministers, governors of central banks, and all of that, what have you, are there. But also supported policy, evidence-based policy making through the creation of several think tanks. Many of them are known today here. I think that our friends from Kenya would be familiar with Kipra or Kadert, or even here in Senegal, Support. There are many today with very uneven influence, because it again depends on the appetite of policymakers on evidence and knowledge. But by and large, many of them today are there. So we continue to play in our new strategy, 2023-2027, to do and implement the same mission and mandate that was created 32 years ago, is to continue to build human capital through skills, but also to build institutions. And this brings back to my statement in the beginning, because those two are intimately linked. So we provide skills through the ACBF Academy, and the ACBF Academy is launching this year 2 big schools that are extremely important to address the issues of shortages. The first one is the African School of Taxation and Public Administration, to address the issue and build the capacity for increased resource mobilization on the continent, and while also improving public finance management, not through technical skills, but through soft skills, such as transformative leadership, accountability, inclusivity, purpose-driven budgeting, PFM. By the way, in this space, civil society is far more advanced than our public sector, because just the civil servants are not wired that way to be open and accountable to citizens. So this is why we are not focusing on technical skills, but more on the soft skills. The second school that we are launching in the beginning of 2024 is the African School of Regulation. As I said earlier, regulation is the first step in policy implementation, and we drastically lack regulatory capacity on our continent. What we do on the continent in terms of regulation is more compliance to others' regulations, but not our own regulation. There are so many sectors that are not regulated at all. And there is important to change that. But it's also through the institutional accelerator. And the institutional accelerator is a tool that allows to look at any organization and analyze, do an assessment on 10 big parameters, going from governance to talent, to systems, to processes, to fundraising, to results measurement, etc., and identify strong points, weaknesses of that organization, and coming up with a capacity development plan. High touch, medium touch, low touch. And this is cognizance that if you build the skills but do not have the right conducive institutions, then impact can be jeopardized. So this is what ACBF offers as part of this community. And we are already doing that for several foundations, unfortunately mostly funded by foreign foundations. But I pledge this to this community to see how we can work together to really strengthen our organizations and improve and increase their ability to make an impact. It's been long, but I hope with some of those, thought-provoking, nothing new, but just putting the finger on issues that I think that if we don't address, our impact will continue to be limited. Thank you for your attention and for allowing me to share with you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.